Man, I wish I had those Mike and Ikes.
They're hitting the spot, man.
Sometimes those kind of candies just do.
And you know what? Like, Mike and Ike is a candy that I slept on for so many years. And then out of the blue, it was the only candy that was on the shelf. And I just like, fuck it. And like, now they're like my favorite candy.
Yeah. They're really
like,
good.
It's that nice like combination of chewy and I like the fruit flavor, you know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And they're not messy.
No.
It's a really good balance of like, give me something that's kind of sour in a way, fruity, so it tastes great. It's got that hard shell, so it's not sticky.
Right.
And you've got that nice slide from the cardboard box.
Oh, yeah.
So it's a nice, like, good portion every time. You're not dipping your hand into like a sugary trolley bag with...
Listen to this slide here.
That is
Isn't
like
that
magic
great?
to my ears.
And you know, man, like I used to be a huge Skittles fan, and I still am. But ever since they changed the lime to the green apple, they like you can't get a lime Skittle anymore. They don't make them.
Oh, I wasn't aware of this.
Yeah, it pisses me off. I don't know why they thought that people would much rather have green apple Skittles over lime Skittles. It's like ridiculous.
I mean, when you think of a green apple, you think of like those are good for baking,
right?
You know, no one really takes a big bite out of a Granny Smith on the regs.
I do.
Do you?
Granny Smith's my favorite apple.
Oh, you're one of those. You know, you're one of those granny people, huh?
I guess so. I'm into the grannies, Will.
Yeah, I mean, they're tart. Jesus Christ. We need to just blanket that as quickly as possible.
Everybody, welcome to Will and Drew's Gaming Retrospective. You're listening to episode 65 for the week of February 23rd, 2020. I'm your host, Drew, and I'm very tired. How you doing, Will?
I'm well, man. I'm slightly caffeinated. It's off of one of those little C2O coconut waters again, but outside of that, man, I'm well. How are you? You said you're a little tired?
Yeah, I mean, my sleep has been all over the place again. So I feel like a broken record every time we record. I'm kind of talking about the same thing, but it's true. Like, I went to bed at 2 o'clock. Let's see here. Friday night, I went to bed at like 4 o'clock in the morning. I woke up at 11 on Saturday. I went to work. Went to bed again at like 2 o'clock in the morning on Sunday. Well, Saturday night into Sunday. Woke up at 7 a.m. on Sunday. We hung out with our friends for the day, and then I was in bed by 10:30. Now I woke up at 7 o'clock this morning again. And
yeah, I mean,
it's all over the place.
It is, and unfortunate as it may be, it's kind of the way your life is right now, and I think you're doing the best that you can, but you know, outside of that, it's still hard to argue the fact that that's kind of a mishmash of sleep patterns.
It's inconsistent at best, and I do my best to get a full 8 hours, but sometimes it just doesn't work out. But the option, the other solution is on my days off, I'm just, become a hermit and ignore everybody. So, what are you going to do, right?
You're here. That's the most important thing.
I'm here. In the words of William Grobbelaar, I'm existing.
That's right.
So,
at a high level, though,
it is a functioning level.
I'm sugarcoating it.
I'm trying to determine whether it's high or not. I think after we're done recording, though, I am going to make a short pot of coffee. It's been about 4 hours since I've had a cup, so I guess I'm overdue.
Well, there's that, but you did have some Mike and Ikes, and I'm a little bit jealous about that.
I did. We bought a box of Mike and Ikes yesterday, and as you and I were discussing, they might be the perfect hand candy. You get them.
I'm sorry, man. I don't know why I'm laughing. It's just the way I wasn't sure where you were going with it, and when you said hand, it was like, I don't know, man. I just got hit with a curveball. I'm sorry.
Hand candy.
And candy. But you know what, dude? You're right, dude. We talked about the shuffling of the sound of their little shellac coating sliding through the cardboard into your hand, and it's a magical sound of those little fruity treats.
I love my fruity treats.
Going into your hand.
Thank you, everybody, for listening to our show. Check us out on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at WDGR Podcast. That's at WDGR Podcast. Of course, we also have a website at www.wdgrpodcast.com where we write about stuff, we share videos about music, and we host this podcast, and it's great. Will, if somebody would like to say hello to you on social media, how can they find you?
Sure, you can find me on Twitter at Will_Gear.
And you can find me just about everywhere at ScionStorm. So, man, have you had an opportunity to play anything this week?
Not a whole lot. I did touch on Gravity Rush 2 briefly, but I haven't spent an enormous amount of time with it because I was busy with the wife over the weekend. Productive, so at least there's that. And then outside of that, just BF1 on game night, but I will touch on that at some point as well because that was a fun night.
Yeah, it sounds like it. I heard some positive feedback in our Discord room, and everybody that was playing seemed to have a good time. So I'm glad that went well. Tell us a little bit about that now.
Sure, might as well. So the thing with Battlefield, it doesn't matter which one you're playing, they always take a while to ramp up. Battlefield 1, unfortunately, is kind of, I mean, I wouldn't even say it's on its way out. It is done. We unfortunately kind of missed the train in terms of peak performance with server rooms and sort of the games being populated. But regardless of that, even if we were playing in its prime, it generally takes a while to kind of get a good game going. With Call of Duty and some other shooters, you can kind of just jump right in and, you might go 20-1 the first game and you can kind of stay consistent with that. But with Battlefield, at least with our experience and certainly mine, it generally takes a while to kind of get into the right game, into the right map, and then all of a sudden you get into a server that you just kind of stay in. Yeah. And that's eventually what happened with us, fighting for finding the right server that had enough room for us to even get in, and being on the right team is a challenge in itself. But once you work past that and you get into that server, you can really get a good game going. And then when you start getting those victories back after back, everything just starts increasing. Your motivation, your gameplay, you start getting a lot of kills, you start capturing a lot of bases. And before you know it, most of us were at the top of the leaderboard in a lot of games. And I'm pretty proud when that happens because we don't play that often, but it still shows that all of our skills that we've honed over the years of playing that particular series have stayed with us. And we've always been very PTFO, which is a Battlefield acronym for play the fucking objective. And because of that, we generally will capture a lot of flags and we'll rack up a lot of points because we know how to play the game. We're some of the few people that will mark people. Marking is a very specific thing in Battlefield where you can actually put like a little red, what we used to call pizzas, above their head. And it's like a little, it's not a logo. It's like
it's a marker.
It's just a marker. Yeah. You put a little marker above their head and they're marked. Right. So we call it marking, and we'll say things like, mark him up, or, I got that guy marked, he's over there on the field, or he's over there on the hill. And we're some of the few people that do that. And it's interesting how some people still don't even know about that feature.
Really?
And I remember in Bad Company 2, like we were marking people left and right, and we got really good at it. And what you have to do it is basically just tap, I think it's R1 I think it's R1 on at least the PS4 controller. And you just aim at the enemy, you tap R1 maybe a couple times to make sure it actually hits, and then you see the red little symbol appear above the enemy's head, and it'll stay there. I forget the rules of engagement in terms of how long it stays there for and cooldown periods and stuff, but it's an interesting feature, and it helps the team out because once they're marked, then you see the enemy more clearly. But I
have to imagine that's going to be incredibly helpful, especially in a game that's so chaotic.
It's chaotic, and there's a lot of strategy that's involved with winning. So we had some good games. We had some good victories. We had a lot of losses, but it's just part of the process. And we had a lot of trouble with some of the horses. The horses are kind of a joke in BF1 because they seem to be invincible. One of the few times I took down a horse was with a turret that was on a train, and I finally killed the horse. So basically, you have horses in the game that you can jump on and ride to get around the map more easily. Kind of like how vehicles have existed in all the BF games ever since day one.
Right.
But they introduced horses in BF1, and they're just incredibly overpowered. Takes a lot to take them down, and even when you're on the horse or when there's an enemy on the horse, it's very hard to kill them. Not only because they're moving, but even if they're not, for some reason they have that extra horse protection for being on there. So we had a lot of like horse jokes and a lot of frustration being kind of lashed out in the party because they're just incredibly frustrating to take down.
Yeah, it sounds like it.
But yeah, it was a fun night, man. Battlefield is a unique experience. It's not for everybody, but thankfully there's a small crew of people that we are surrounded by that enjoy to play the game. So
cool. So, I mean, one thing that kind of concerned me, and we kind of talked about it a little bit before we started recording, was the life of the game. You know, this is a game that came out in, I think it was 2016, we said?
Yes. Yeah. So I'm just sad. I think a lot of us are. I voiced it that night. I remember going into Discord and just kind of venting slightly because, you know, it really does kind of hurt that this is actually kind of the second time that the original crew, and when I say that, I'm talking like Raph, Tio, Joe, me, and some of the other guys, you know, we kind of didn't stay with these games for super long. Like BF4 had its issues, but I'm pretty sure they cleaned it up after a while, and we were not playing it once it was cleaned up. And then with BF1, it was just short-lived, same kind of thing, you know, like came out, not a lot of maps, fizzled out quickly for no real reason, besides just kind of venturing off into different territory with different games. And, you know, now that we've kind of touched on it here and there, and we're trying to kind of make like a larger comeback, unfortunately, that train has come and gone. So right now what we're doing is we're chasing like this one last train that happens to have a couple servers, and it's sad because there are some really good DLC maps that we are just not able to play because no one's in there. No one. It'll just be like server after server of like 0 out of 64 when you're looking at like player counts, and it's just unfortunate because some of the maps are incredible. So that's what's going on. You know, it's a dead game. There are people still playing it, but very few, and they're usually stuck in some kind of paid for server that somebody's still paying for and running. And you know, it's probably just a bunch of, you know, BF1 hardcore fans, which is fine, but yeah, it's just not very populated.
That's a shame.
It is a shame. It's a good game.
I mean, if are there any games on the horizon that are coming out or are already out that you would like to try for like a future game night that are a little more, you know, a little bit more current, but still kind of fits that same mold?
Great question. I think that we've kind of touched on the BF5 idea a couple times. We played the beta as a group, and I remember we enjoyed it for the most part. But for some reason, I just don't think any of us really kind of pulled the trigger on it when it came out. I think that we just weren't really quite sold on it. I'm sure Joe and Raph would agree. We just didn't really have like a solid consensus as to whether or not everybody was getting it. So it just kind of, you know, came out. I think Joe picked it up, maybe a couple others. I never got it. And apparently it had some issues from the beginning, which is common for that series. But apparently they're still supporting it in a very heavy way. So I'm curious, and Joe's got me curious into whether or not it should be kind of delved into. So that could be on the horizon for us. Interesting.
You know, it's kind of tough, at least from my perspective, to choose some of these games because, like, you know, we want to try and stay current with like the game nights that we're doing, but then you get to a point where you're kind of just chasing like this never-ending supply of like brand new games, and you end up, you know, buying the new hotness and never really fully exploring it. You know, it's how I ended up with like hundreds of dollars in debt in Xbox 360 games. You know, because I was constantly chasing the next multiplayer game without really fully enjoying the previous one. But
yeah, it's an interesting cycle, and I'll give you one quick example. There was a coworker that is sits right behind me. He's super into video games, and I was trying to pressure him into getting BF1 because it was on sale for $7.99 at one point, and then it went up to $9.99 because he missed the first sale. And I was like, dude, you got to get this. We're playing on Friday, blah, 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 blah. And he was playing when this game was in its prime.
Yeah.
And I think he was, pretty clever enough to not really pull the trigger on it, because once I told him that it's not super active, I think very quickly he became hesitant. And I don't blame him, because he never ended up getting it. He never played with us. And I'm sure it's for the right reasons, because he's doing what we kind of do now. We're very choosy about stuff like that, whether it's $5 or not, man.
Yeah.
Why would I buy a multiplayer game for $5 if I'm not going to play the campaign and if no one's online?
Yeah, I agree.
We've done it. Sometimes we're like, oh, dude, $7.99, yeah, and then you just buy it. But generally, it becomes what I call a Steam sale game, and it gets lost in the void.
Yeah, I just had one of those, oh my God, it's on sale moments. Last night.
Super dangerous.
I bought a copy of Civilization 6 for the Switch for $15.
Okay.
And, as you're aware, I am still working on my massive backlog, which I've done a terrible job with. I really have not spent any serious time with a game in weeks, but $15 for a Civ game on the go, like, I'm all for that. So, yeah, I'm super looking forward to getting that and popping that in. I should have a copy of that tomorrow. I think it should arrive.
I'm sure it's probably a pretty interesting experience on the Switch as well.
Oh, yeah. And from what I understand, too, I believe I can actually start a game on the Switch, and then if I own a copy on the PC, I could play it on the PC with the same save and then go back to the Switch. Let me see if I can find the details on that. Civ 6, Steam to Switch save. I'm just Googling here. Yeah, so there's cross-platform cloud saves. And I don't know if this is something that was implemented recently. Yeah, so if you have cloud save enabled on Steam and Nintendo Switch, you can link your 2K account, and it will cross-platform save. So if I'm playing on the Switch, and then I'm like, you know what, I really want to sit in front of two monitors and play, I could do that, and then I could save that game, and then jump on the train with my Switch and continue there. And that's fucking cool, man. So yeah, I don't have a copy on Steam, but I mean, Steam sales are great, and maybe I'll buy it. I don't really know.
Yeah, I don't fuck with Steam anymore. I mean, I had it. I still actually have it on the Mac side, but I don't ever log in. And then when I had Windows installed, I obviously had it on that, and there were definitely quite a few sales that I participated in, and those games are in the void. And then with the PS app, which is a very dangerous app to have on your phone, because you can just tap right into there, quite literally, and then they generally have a sale, like what seems to be every goddamn week, mind you.
Oh,
there's always like a goddamn 75% off sale, and then of course you're going to click on it, and it's got pages of games from $10 to $15 to $4 to $7 to $8, and it's all these like low numbers where you're like, it's only $8.
You get into trouble. 15. You get into trouble doing that, but like it's hard to argue against it.
It is, dude. It's such a double-edged sword.
Like, okay, so I don't buy coffee this week. Big fucking deal.
You find reasons to justify it.
You skip a trip to Dunkin' Donuts, or maybe when you go out to lunch this week, you don't get that dessert on the side or whatever. You cut back something else. Or maybe you don't cut back at all. Maybe the $5 is a drop in the water for you. It's not a big deal. But that's how we just the backlog just gets worse and worse and worse. And oh man, the Switch is less overt about it, but they do that kind of shit too, man.
Yeah. It's I will say where it's definitely worth pulling the trigger is if you have been eyeing a game for a long time and it's been just stuck at $40 for ever.
Yeah.
And then finally goes down 15, or 10, which can happen, you better buy that, because I've seen games that I have not pulled the trigger on go down in price like dramatically, and then I haven't done it, and then it's gone right back up to like 40 or $50.
Totally.
And then sometimes they'll keep it there for like months, and then all of a sudden it drops again out of the blue. So it's tricky, you just got to do it when it's the right time. I know Final Fantasy Tactics, kind of a shitty example because it's been $10 forever, and $10 is $10, but I just, for whatever reason, I just didn't want to fork over the $10 for it. So one day it went down to like $4.99, and I was like, all right, that's it. Finally getting it.
For me,
it took forever though.
but I mean, it happened, and that's just the thing. You just have to determine like how patient are you, and like for me, like when Nikki and I first moved in together, we did a lot of extreme couponing. We were a single family or single paycheck household for a very long time. So we did everything in our power to stretch $1 as far as we could. And, I will wait for things to go on sale if I've seen them at a previous price point, just because I know that it'll happen again. And like, I hesitate to spend money full price on games unless like there are very few exceptions to the rule. But like, Doom Eternal, that's going to be a game that I will buy day one full price, and that's fine. But if it's a game that like I don't know in advance, like Final Fantasy VII, the remaster, I might hold off on that. I might wait for that to drop in price. I'm not sure. So like, for example, like Civ, like I knew I wanted it, but I didn't want it $60, want it. I certainly didn't want it, even at $40. I figure like maybe 10 to 15 is my price point. And I was like, $15 is good. I'll do 15.
Yeah. And I think, along with all of this, you get that, I'll get to this mentality, which is, something that we all kind of deal with, but sometimes it can work in your favor, and sometimes it's not always such a bad mentality to have, and that's exactly where I kind of was mentally when FF Tactics was purchased. I was like, I'm probably not going to get to this right now. I want to get to it, but I'm probably not going to do it. But $5 to play this later when I am ready, I'm doing it, because that game is either locked at 10 or it's like, $100 for the PS1 copy on eBay.
Oh, wow.
So no one wants to do that.
I'm curious now. Let me hit up price charting.
Yeah, do it up, man.
Final Fantasy Tactics.
Dude, you know what I did last night?
What's up?
This is not really video game related, but I'm sure people will appreciate this. I have a box that is full of like baseball cards and basketball cards and basically just sports collectible cards that no one in my mind in 2020 is still collecting or even talking about. But I finally went through them, and I'm like, all right. And as you know, I've been like, I'm very much a minimalist now. I've been throwing so much shit out, and I'm trying to simplify my materialistic life. And I came across this box. I've known about it forever, and I just didn't know how to sell them, because from what I understand, like last time I checked, you have to get like some weird book, almost like a Kelly Blue book or some like weird shit to like figure out what they're worth.
Okay.
And I finally found some websites online where you can type in like the card number, the player name, and stuff like that.
Really?
And yeah, I've got a couple in there that are worth some money. And it was kind of satisfying. And it got to the point where once I saw the value on a couple of them, I just went to town. I was like, all right, let's sort out the baseball cards. Let's go through each one of these. And it became a very difficult process. But for whatever reason, us talking about what we were talking about reminded me of that.
Well, best of luck in your baseball card sales.
Yeah, hopefully I can get these things finally sold.
Yeah, man. I think you got a good shot. I got a good feeling about this.
All right.
Yeah. So hey, we got a bunch of cool stuff in the mailbag going, huh?
Yeah. Let's hit this up.
Let's open this up. So I want to say maybe Thursday or Friday last week. News broke that there's going to be a Tony Hawk video game documentary talking about how the Tony Hawk's Pro Skater came to be, and it's coming out later this month in February. And I was never like a big Tony Hawk Pro Skater guy, but it's kind of hard to discount what that game did for the industry. It's a very popular game that a lot of people have extremely fond memories of. And I think it brought skateboarding to the forefront for a lot of people, and it blended incredible music with for the time pretty good graphics in a way that had never been seen before. So it's a very influential game.
Agreed.
So I asked the community, in light of the new Tony Hawk game documentary, what video games would you like to see get a documentary? What sort of look would you like for the doc to take? Hard-hitting, fluffy, happy memories? Hit us up before we record today, right now. And we got some really interesting responses. So I want to kind of talk over some of those. Let's start with Joe Donuts. He says, I think at this point, just about any live game currently running would make for a really interesting documentary. Of course, they're all too new for anyone to talk, but I think a documentary about the state of BioWare and Anthem, or Andromeda, from the team's perspective would be pretty fascinating.
Yes. Man, first of all, such a good question for the show and the mailbag, and I'm so proud to see like all these amazing questions and comments. I would love to see something with BioWare and Anthem, because I think some of these studios are kind of mysterious and they don't always come out with a lot of, behind the scenes footage of what's going on. I would love to see some like juicy, drama filled like documentary about the rise and fall of Anthem. That would be amazing. Like, I don't really even know much outside of what you've told me about the sort of short history with that game. But I would love to see like a documentary of all of the Mass Effect games leading into Anthem, and then seeing the rise and fall of Anthem. And that would be such a good documentary, I think.
I think Jason Schreier from Kotaku should write that. He's done a lot of work in like uncovering some of the nasty shit that goes on in the video game industry. And, he was the one that revealed like the working conditions at BioWare were terrible, and how Anthem was kind of like this just misguided mess, from day one. Mm-hmm. So I would like to hear like, a detailed perspective on what he's found, contrasted with like, input from the employees, and even like I would want to hear from the CEOs and stuff too, like the higher ups, and kind of get their perspective. And if it was objective as possible, to kind of let everybody kind of get their point of view across, but without like sacrificing the truth,
Mm-hmm. Sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say like that could be really compelling, but I mean, we would definitely have to start with like Mass Effect before you get into the Anthem part, because I feel like Anthem is directly impacted by Andromeda.
Yeah, I would think so. I mean, it was the game that followed Andromeda, right?
Yeah.
What was the gap? Did we mention the gap between Andromeda and Anthem in terms of like years, or?
Andromeda, let's see here. Andromeda came out in 2017. So 2 years. Right?
Okay.
Because Anthem came out in 2019.
Okay.
Not a lot of time.
Yeah, not really, but I agree with everything you said. And, without kind of diving too deep, I just think that, more game companies should be releasing things like this, or more outside documentary film companies should be, knocking on the devs' doors and saying, hey, like, let's do this. There just doesn't seem to be a lot of, behind the scenes action with a lot of games. And you occasionally see like these little featurettes on YouTube for like, The Last of Us or something. And some of those things are so interesting, and they're painfully short. So You'll watch something for like 15 minutes and then you're like, where's part 2? Or why is this not a whole thing? And I don't know. I would just love to see so much more in older games too. Imagine like seeing a documentary about like how they made Wave Race 64.
Oh, that'd be fun.
Like, who are these people? Like, there's so many games that were developed by people that we just don't know who they are. We barely know anything about the studio, and it makes you wonder like where they are now. So that's my thoughts.
I could get behind that for sure. Vortex chimes in what Joe said, so he wants to see something similar. I'd love to get a hard-hitting doc on Anthem and PUBG. So last few updates on PUBG have made the game unplayable for a lot of players. People are pissed, and many have left the game because of shit that's gone down or is going down. They put out patches that fuck up the game even more, and I'd love to get a hard look into their leadership and process of thinking why a broken patch should go out. Also, maybe a documentary on EA and how they managed to close every studio they buy. EA does have a pretty nasty reputation for closing down some great studios, man.
Yeah, unfortunately, it's got a lot of negative, sort of food that comes with that too. Like it's a lot of like EA bullshit, EA. It's a lot of like kids kind of shitting on EA, and adults too. But it's unfortunate when you see people as soon as they read those two letters, that it's just, I don't know. It just kind of goes down a rabbit hole of negativity, and I don't have anything to contribute to it. I know a little bit about some of the controversy behind EA, but I don't know enough to kind of jump on any particular wagon.
I mean, Electronic Arts bought out Westwood Studios, which was the creator and developer for the Command & Conquer series. And from my perspective, I think they took a team and a franchise, bought it out, and then ruined it. And now the studio doesn't exist anymore, and the franchise hasn't had anything done with it in, over a decade. There's a shitty mobile game. Big fucking deal, right? So,
right.
So, I mean, like, from my perspective, with Command & Conquer being one of my most beloved franchises, EA fucked that up. They ruined it. So I get the hate. And it's not the first time that they've done something like that. They do have a history of buying studios, absorbing the franchises, and then running the franchises into the ground. It's just a pattern. If it was a one-off thing here and there, it would be different, but it's a pattern.
Well, clearly, like, there's no way that they're doing it, like, necessarily intentionally. Maybe there's a real root cause that would only be exposed with something like a documentary, and I think that's why Vic's point here is so good, because that's a good studio to kind of look at under a lens. And with PUBG, my comment to that is kind of what it's always been. When you're playing something that's so popular that's online, I think you're going to face these kind of issues fairly often, because it's always being patched, it's always being worked on. You've got people complaining about this gun not working right, and it ends up being something that's tweaked a lot. And with that tweaking can come joy and frustration, and I think it's often a roller coaster that I'm sure you're familiar with.
That's a good way to put it. Let's see here. Pucksaur says, I would get more of a kick out of a documentary about failed games, or even a quote, see what the designer for X didn't ship on their way to Y. Example, StarCraft Ghost, how far it got, what went wrong, how it may have morphed into the failed MMO that eventually did ship as Overwatch. This would be coolest for retro games, but I can only think of Ghost on the spot. Yeah, man, StarCraft Ghost is a pretty famous, good example of a game that was like all the rage, all the buzz, and then never happened. And, I never even thought about it, but it is entirely possible that morphed into what ended up becoming Overwatch. That's kind of an interesting thought.
Yeah, that is actually, this, for whatever reason, I mean, I think it's just because star is in the word here, but this reminds me of Star Wars 1313, which I've mentioned, I think, once before. I wouldn't say it's a failed title, but it was certainly one that was never released, and I'm not sure what happened, but it kind of, touches on Pux's point here about making a documentary about a failed game. Like I said, I'm not sure if it failed or not, but I guess in some ways it must have, because it didn't release. But, I guess you'd have to figure out where's the line drawn between a canceled game or a failed game. I think there may be a difference there.
I think in this case, canceled would apply more. If you're talking about a failed game in a different term, I suppose that would imply, a game that was released and flopped because it was a mess or whatever, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like the game is a failure.
I would agree.
Yeah. But yeah, like I just kind of quickly looked up Ghost because I kind of forgotten like all the details about this, and there's actually some footage that leaked fairly recently. So very interesting. It kind of reminds me of like a Blizzard Metroid.
Huh.
Like,
you mean like Metroid?
Like Metroid Prime. Like
okay.
that kind of thing. Here, I'll send a link over to you so you can take a peek. But very interesting. I'm going to have to check these videos out. I'll send this over to Pucks too. While this is fresh in my mind. I'm literally sending you a thing while we're discussing it, Puxor. Yeah, that's very, very cool. I'll have to watch this later. Let's see here. YMMOC from the Retrospectives podcast says DayZ deserves a documentary. It was such a revolutionary game and came from such humble origins. Don't know how much you guys know about it, but it started out as a mod for Arma 2, and its original form required registry edits just to get working. Wow. And then stories started to spread about the gameplay experience, and Arma 2 was a top-selling game on Steam for literal weeks, all thanks to this little innocuous mod. And this mod basically invented, or at least laid the groundwork for, the Battle Royale genre. Interesting. I really don't know much about DayZ at all, so thank you for sharing this. This is the most I've kind of heard about this game. I've heard the name tossed around a bunch, but I don't really know much about it.
Yeah, for a second, when I had read this question prior to the show, I was thinking about that other game, Days Gone, which I know I think that might be, it's not a failed game, but it certainly didn't do that well. But outside of that, DayZ, I'm glad I Googled this just now because I am somewhat familiar with this because at one point I was watching some people on YouTube, some pretty famous people on YouTube playing this game. And from what I remember, it's kind of PUBG like, it's very similar to PUBG. I'm not sure in which ways. Perhaps it's a little bit more open world. Again, I'm working off of like vague memories of what I remember seeing, but I think it's very similar to PUBG in some way.
Yeah,
I can't remember how.
I really don't know much about it at all, but it does seem quite interesting. And that would actually be a very fascinating documentary too. I think that is something I would like to see.
Yeah, certainly.
This one comes from @SonOfAFitch, who is one of the hosts of the Talk Me Into podcast. Check them out as well. I'd love to see a documentary on the current console wars, Sony versus Microsoft from PS2 and Xbox onward, seeing the insight of both competitors and what they were thinking about the other through each generation. For a game doc, the production of Chrono Trigger would be fun. Getting that team of huge names in the industry to come together to make a super game would be fascinating to see how it was conglomerated.
This reminds me of some documentaries I've already seen on YouTube for like Dreamcast. There's quite a few like console documentaries that are generally about 30 to 45 minutes a piece that I believe are done by like just random YouTubers. I'm not even sure. I could probably link a couple in chit chat for y'all to see. But I remember watching one on the Dreamcast and I was glued to my phone.
Really?
Because I love watching. First of all, I just love documentaries.
Me too.
I just love documentaries. I think most people do because they're usually quite well done. And people like to be informed about things in that kind of way. But the gaming industry as a whole is just such an interesting thing. And I think, Fitch's point here with Microsoft from PS2 and Xbox onward, I mean, I'd love to see so much rich history and behind the scenes of what's going on in these companies day to day, end-to-end processes, learn more about Mark Cerny from Sony and, whoever's in charge over at Microsoft. I just want to know, like, let's do like an MTV Cribs of their house. What are they eating for breakfast? Or do they like eggs in the morning or oatmeal? What's going on here?
Yeah.
Let's find out.
Well, because it kind of helps you get in the mindset of like what these people are thinking and going through when they make these decisions, you know.
Mm-hmm.
You know, did Bill Gates, when he was like getting ready to launch the Xbox, was that like all he was eating, sleeping, and dreaming, or did he like pass that off to somebody else and like make it that all they were eating, sleeping, and dreaming? You know.
Well, think about it like this, and this just kind of came to my mind here. Back when I was collecting DVDs, I used to love watching all the behind-the-scenes footage that was on the DVDs, and we've totally lost touch with that. Like when you buy a Blu-ray, like no one fucking does that anymore. We're not really going to special features that often, and if we are, it's probably just to check out like a small featurette. But like generally speaking, the idea of watching hours of behind-the-scenes stuff has sort of slipped away from at least the movie side of the or the movie industry.
Yeah.
But it makes me think like, you know, those things were a thing, and in the game world or the gaming industry, I feel like those kind of things have existed, but there's still such a shroud of mystery in the gaming industry where your average gamer will know about a game from a game site, buy the game on release, and that's kind of the end of it. They never see like how it's made. They might hear from somebody else that, like Red Dead 2 took like 6 years to make, and that's the extent of their fun facts. And sure, that's fine. Maybe they don't want to know anything else, but I think if there was more of a larger lens on what's going on with making the games, then it would become more of a thing.
I think it depends on how that is presented, though. Like, if you're doing a video on how the game is made prior to the game's release, it comes off as a propaganda piece. I remember watching like all these little mini docs about Anthem and Mass Effect when, you know, those games were about to come out, and, you know, BioWare was putting out these videos about the artwork and the character design and everything. And like, it was fascinating, but these are coming through the studio from the lens of the publisher and the studio that are developing the game. So it's not a hard hitting, serious look at what the game, you know, turned out to be. A documentary for this sort of thing, I think, would be best served if it's a hindsight look at what the end result was and done by a third party.
Sure.
You know, so it's tricky because you can't have that before the game comes out, you know, and that's when people are most likely to look at it, is when that game is about to be released. You know, the average gamer is going to be looking for those hype videos to get them all amped up about this new game that they want. And maybe they'll find what they're looking for, but probably not. You know, they're more than likely going to find that propaganda video that, you know, Electronic Arts put out trying to hype up their own game so that they can sell as many as possible. And I use EA as an example, but I mean, it really does extend to other devs too, or other publishers rather.
I agree. And I think you hit the nail on the head in terms of like third party, you know, film industries or film companies that will make some of these documentaries. I mean, some of the best I think that we've all ever seen, even outside of gaming, have been done by just independent film companies that will do a better job because they're not going to be, you know, biased with you know, the content. You know, if Naughty Dog is putting out a documentary, sure, it's probably going to be good, but it would be interesting to have a third party film company or something independent kind of, you know, knock on the door and be like, hey, you know, we're going to take a tour. We want to do this. We want to learn about Uncharted, and, you know, let's dive into the mind of what's his face, Nolan North, and, you know, just kind of do that sort of deep dive that I think a lot of us want to see. But yeah, I think the important part is, you know, post game release, I guess. So nothing before.
I bet you were a Criterion Collection household, weren't you?
Oh yeah, dude.
I remember those.
It was painful for me in some ways to let go of some of like my Criterion Collection DVDs and all of my limited editions and super bit DVDs and all that kind of stuff. And, you know, now I just have a handful of Blu-rays that I can't live without. But I do miss those times of, you know, loading up The Matrix and then spending 3 hours watching how the movie was made on the same disc. Yep. But those were the days of DVDs, and people just did shit like that.
Yeah. It's amazing how, like, when DVDs came out, like, that was the rage. Like, that was the point of having a DVD of a movie, was to have the special features. And now we've gone full circle with that, and nobody gives a shit.
No one gives a fuck. And you're absolutely right. Remember, you would turn the DVD case around, you look at the back side of it, and it would always say, like, kind of in bold lettering, like, behind the scenes look or special features included. and it had that kind of rhetoric, and to kind of not see that now on Blu-rays, I suppose is okay, but there's got to be a reason or a statistic that they figured out that people just don't seem to care.
Yeah. It's crazy, man. It really is.
It is.
Let's see here. Final submission here. Epic Outro says maybe a documentary about Friday the 13th, the game from 2017, and how the lawsuit over the film rights effectively killed it by mandating that the game could never again release new content. I don't know a lot about this, but I've heard some details in passing from Dave, Epic Outro. And I guess there was some kind of a lawsuit on the film side that is like affecting the game side. And it is such a sad thing when, like, you know, there's innocent bystanders that get hurt, you know, like in the video game world or whatever, you know, like that game didn't do anything wrong.
I wouldn't know. I mean, I know it had a pretty big cult following from what I understand. But you know, again, I don't really know much about it. I've done very, very little research, if at all. I've just kind of heard things here and there. But anything that says, you know, film rights or lawsuit, I'm already engaged.
Yeah. So from what I hear, this is let's see here. I found this on a site called bloody-disgusting.com. It looks like they cover a lot of horror, you know, things like that. It says, as many in our community may be aware, a legal claim has been made which could affect all future Friday the 13th intellectual property. Although in the past the game has not been the subject to any such claim, new content and material going forward will be affected. An initial decision in this case was expected October 2017, but no decision has been issued. Court reviewed, and this is in a post in, I think, 2018. Too long, didn't read. We've now been forced to accept that the lawsuit makes future content for the game, including alternate play modes, new playable Jasons and counselors, and new maps, unfeasible for now or in the future. So what does this mean exactly? There will be no additional content added to Friday the 13th, the game. This includes, quote-unquote, Uber Jason, the Grendel map, Jason kill packs, clothing, emotes, and new counselors. So the game is still online and still functioning. They're still doing bug fixes, routine maintenance, but they're just not producing new content for it. And this is a game that was getting a lot of love from the horror community. You know?
Yeah,
that's a shame.
That is. Like I said, I think, you know, what's intriguing about this is like anything to do with, like I said, lawsuit or legal rights or anything. I'm not a law person, but I think generally when you have something like that going on, it becomes a pretty engaging story. And I would love to see I wouldn't say the rise and fall, but the beginning of the making of this game, learn more about it, and learn what's going on with it now. Yeah,
me too. It's super sad. I hate when that kind of shit happens, man. Like getting legal stuff in the way. Ah, man. Are there any other games that you would like to see made into a documentary?
Yeah. I think a lot of them, like I said, have never existed. Like there's been no behind the scenes whatsoever. Like you can go on Google, or not Google, you can go on YouTube, and I'm sure you could type in like behind the scenes and type in like any old game, and you're probably not going to find anything. In some cases you might, but I think that it's rare. So with that being said, I think that it would be a number of games that I would like to see a complete documentary of. A lot of them would be games that I've mentioned so many times before. I'd love to see the making of Asura's Wrath from start to finish, like a full-fledged, really hearty meat potatoes documentary on that game. Because that was one of those kind of games, to my knowledge, that just kind of came out. You either loved it or hated it. There was an art book, and that's kind of it. And that's what I feel like happens a lot with a lot of games. Only the newer ones now seem to include any kind of featurette on YouTube, whether it's pre or post release. But yeah, Metal Gear Solid 4, I know there's some footage that I saw, I think, on one of the DVDs that came with that game.
Okay.
And it was very engaging. It was like, you know, film cameras in the studio, talking to Kojima, showing them like play test the game in like early alpha stages. That kind of stuff I love to see. Because it's cool to see how they operate from a day-to-day basis. And a lot of these guys are really sitting in like a cubicle atmosphere with a computer, with like 2-3 monitors, and they have like a controller that's plugged into a system, and they're like testing it, they're making it, they're drawing drawings, they're doing art design, and it seems to be quite the grind. I'm sure that they're, they get to go home every day and say that they make video games for a living, but I'm sure there are quite a lot of processes that are incredibly daunting. And I think it would be really cool to see a lot of those devs kind of open up and say, hey, there are days that I want to call out. There are days that I find myself overwhelmed. And I'm sure that that's very common. I mean, we've heard about it before, right? We've heard about it from Rockstar. I know they have a reputation for apparently overworking their employees, and I don't know if that's factual or not, but I think that it would be interesting to find out if it is.
Yeah.
Because look, I mean, these games, I think it's pretty prevalent that a lot of them do have some pretty tight release windows and tight time frames in terms of, when it needs to be started and finished. And it would be curious, or I would be curious to find out whether or not there is some pretty crazy things going on behind the scenes that we don't know about.
Yeah, and we may never know about too. We
may never know, but I think one thing that we do know is there's no way that it's not stressful. There's got to be days where some of these guys are just like, holy shit, dude, I'm overwhelmed. Going in there, knowing that they've got to finish like an art design by like X time or whatever, like that's got to be tough.
I wonder what the statistics are on like that industry and depression and, mental illness.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think the dark side of gaming is like, a lot of us don't think about those things. We just buy a $60 game and be like, oh yeah, this game, look how amazing it looks. But there was a team, a very large team that poured blood, sweat, and tears into that game. And I don't know, I think I'm kind of leading into something else, but there should be more appreciation for devs, I think, as a whole, because if it wasn't for these guys, we would not be sitting on our couches enjoying our $60 games that are masterpieces.
Maybe we should like start a movement, like Hug a Game Developer Day.
I think so, dude, and I mean that seriously. These guys are ghosts in my eyes because they are not always at the forefront, and they should be. I think at E3 and any of these kind of events, there should be more of like, hey, we're bringing all of Naughty Dog up on the stage right now. Let's go. Come on, Jerry, Sue, Chris, I know you're out there. Come on up. Like a Academy Awards kind of thing, like where they bring like the whole sound crew up and shit on stage.
Yeah.
There should be more of that, because there just should be, for all the reasons I mentioned already.
Yeah.
There is not enough appreciation for it, man.
That's a good point. No, I think you're right. I think you're onto something with that for sure.
I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but I just don't see that. I mean, maybe I'm not watching the right things or I'm not looking at the right content, but I think anybody listening could at least hopefully relate to what I'm saying.
Yeah, I think you might be right, man. Well, the good thing is, at least in the term of, documentaries and in that, creative space, there is a lot of content on YouTube, and there are a lot of fantastic documentaries being made about the game industry from multiple different perspectives. Off the top of my head, there's a YouTube channel by Jeremy Parrish. He's one of the hosts of Retronauts. He does a series of videos chronicling basically mostly Nintendo stuff up to this point, but he goes game by game talking about each game, and he goes into details about the development of the games, where the studios came from and what they had done, and if there was like a leader on the dev team, what their previous work had been like. It's more of a historical point of view than a documentary type thing, but I think it kind of falls in that gray area of what we're talking about, because it does go into details about the development cycle of some of these games as well too, when that information is available. And then you have, let's see here, My Life in Gaming is a pretty good YouTube channel. They do deep dives on games and genres and development of certain games. Modern Vintage Gamer does a lot of that work too. So there is some of that content out there, but those two channels tend to lack in like interviews, things like that. Digital Foundry can sometimes get some pretty good access, and No Clip is a really good one. No Clip does some great documentary style pieces on YouTube. Definitely worth checking them out. So there's stuff out there. It's not as robust and as well produced as I'd like it to be, but it exists. And I guess that's a start,
It is a start. And yeah, I mean, I don't want to rehash anything. I feel like I've said a lot, and I just agree. I just overall, I would just wrap it up by saying, more spotlight on devs and more documentary, more BTS stuff. I think would be a great next step in the gaming industry.
Sounds good to me, man. I think it's a great way to wrap it up. Final note for the episode. The developers of Cyberpunk actually put up a tweet today that's saying that if you buy Cyberpunk on the Xbox One, you will not have to buy it again on the Xbox Series X. The game will upgrade for free when it's available. And I believe this may be a start of a pattern thanks to Xbox, who is looking to make backwards compatibility as seamless of a process as possible.
I think that's very cool.
Yeah.
And I remember when you mentioned it before the show, I'm pretty sure I saw something on Twitter about this too. I glazed over it, so I didn't know I wasn't familiar with the details, but I think that's a very cool thing. I know they said something about like how we would never do so and so, and that's kind of where I stopped reading. But
I hope that PlayStation gets the backwards compatibility right this generation.
I hope so too. I'm glad you brought that up because I know we spoke about that also before the show briefly, and it's important because, like I had said before, I think more people are becoming more of a minimalist in their personal lives, and I know I certainly am. And the last thing I want to do is own multiple consoles. It's just that simple. I don't think that this is there's a science to this. It's either you don't mind collecting a lot or you do. People want backwards compatibility, at least to my knowledge, for that very reason. They don't want to stack consoles. They want something that's going to do mostly everything, with the exception of like playing every single game. But,
right.
If they have a PS5, I think if it was PS4 and PS3 compatible, that would be a huge success. There's a lot of people that still have PS3s kicking around just like me. And, as much as I love the system and it's very nostalgic for me, I'd love to toss that thing and load up some PS1 games, even the physical games, into a PS5, or just be able to play. If I could play PS1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 on PS5, which is asking a lot, but certainly possible because the PS3 and the PS4 both do similar ideas, or they entertain ideas with that. It's possible. It would probably have to be in some sort of digital format, but something like that would certainly would be something I would not complain about.
Would you be willing to rebuy games that you had previously bought and sold or whatever, if you had to? Even PS4 games to get them working on the 5?
I think so. I think if the PS5 came out and said, hey, you can play physical and digital PS2 games on this, I'd be like, huh, okay. And I would probably buy a couple PS2 games.
Okay.
Because there are some PS2 games that I would love to play again, and they're very few and far between in the digital realm on PS4. And PS3, I believe they're playable as well, only in digital form. So it would be cool to play some of those games again.
Which games?
There's a disc that I still have. It's my last PS2 game. It's not even really a game. It's actually kind of a behind-the-scenes documentary, which is really ironic. I'm going to have to talk about this right now. It's called Metal Gear Solid 2.
Of course it is.
Yeah, it's called Metal Gear Solid. No, it's called the document. It's called the doc. God damn you! Let a man speak.
I'm sorry.
No, it's fine. It's totally fine. It's called the it's called the document of Metal Gear Solid 2, and it's very, very rare. And that's why I won't get rid of it, because it is a very unique behind-the-scenes look on Metal Gear Solid 2. You can listen to the entire soundtrack on the disc because they have like a little section for it. And then the rest of it is like gameplay footage. I believe there's footage of the studio. I have not loaded it up in years. Probably the last time would have been 2008 or 9 was the last time I fired that up when I still had a PS2. But that would be something I'd want to pop back in. There's a game called... Oh, what is it called? Silmeria. It's like Valkyrie Chronicles Silmeria 2 or something like that. It's kind of a Japanese game, but I think that's what it's called. And I'd love to play that because I heard it's outstanding. I'd love to load the Soul Calibur 2 PS2 version with Heihachi. Just shit like that, dude. You know, just like games that I had that I just never really played or beat. I would love to fire up on a PS5.
Nice. I like it.
Yeah, I mean, even PS3, they have. I think I mentioned this before. They have a PS smoothing option, which takes PS1 games and it smooths them out.
I never really found that worked out the way I wanted it to. I always thought it sounded better in practice, but I was always disappointed with the results of the smoothing.
I don't know if I really like tooled around with it enough. Like I didn't do like a before and after. Yeah. I think I just kind of put it on because I thought, ooh, like this is going to help. Yeah. So I wouldn't know, but yeah, man, I think I bought Twisted Metal 2 digitally for the PS3. I mean, I have a copy of it anyway, which the PS3 will play, but I think, I don't remember why I bought it, but I did, whatever. Anyway, I remember trying the smoothing on that, and I was just like, I actually like it better ugly. Yeah. Speaking of that, just super quick, I was watching a Digital Foundry video. I know Damien likes these guys. It was a comparison of the Vanquish and Bayonetta, like that new release that just came out, the remastered versions. Yep. And they were comparing consoles with like, the 360, the PS3, and then of course the PS4 and Xbox One. And the new PS4 and Xbox One remastered versions of this game, especially with Vanquish, it left a bad taste in my mouth because the shadows coming off of Sam and Vanquish and everybody else are like all jaggedy, I guess, on like the remaster. And they compared it to the PS3 and the Xbox One or the Xbox 360 version, and they were way smoother and softer. And I was like, I mean, these kind of things are not uncommon. I think that a lot of remasters sometimes go almost too far and then something looks too crisp or sharp. But it was slightly disappointing. It made me think, maybe I don't really need to get these remastered versions anymore because I don't really like the shadow effect, and that would probably like bother me because I'm super OCD and I would never be able to unsee it now.
The Digital Foundry stuff, I adore them. Like, those guys do some tremendous work and they dive into such immense detail. But it's a double-edged sword, I feel, because you're diving into these games and breaking them down on a technical level that I think nobody ever would. And they're doing it in such a precise way that it's like you can't even argue with it. It's like, well, Digital Foundry said it, so it must be the end-all be-all, because they have like data to back everything up. It comes off as factual and true. But in the same token, I think that a lot of times they're ruining the experience by doing that. Like, that just unsold you on a game. You were 100% on board with it until you watched that video. If you never watched that video, you probably never would have even noticed.
That's 100% it. And I think that's the danger. And this kind of maybe really wraps up our point about documentaries and BTS stuff is sometimes I remember in the past, like deliberately not looking at that stuff because I didn't want to know. Right. I didn't want to know how they did the fight scene in Braveheart, the most infamous scene where he's like, and then fight with me or whatever, like his famous speech. Like, I remember, I think, skipping past that because I didn't really want to know. I didn't want to know that much. And that's quite potentially why that's not a thing anymore, because people were finding out too much, and they're like, oh man, like when Neo dodges the bullets, he was on strings behind a green screen. Well, first of all, no shit. Okay? And then second of all, don't ruin it. Let your imagination be the one to decide. And so
that's coming from the pro wrestling world, that's a huge thing, like it's fascinating kind of looking behind the curtain and seeing what's going on. And, I always really enjoyed the process of analyzing the decisions. Why did John Cena beat The Undertaker or whatever, just pulling shit out of my ass. Like, it's not about what happened today. It's about what's going to happen tomorrow or a month from now or a year from now, and looking at it from that objective. But you lose the magic in that process. Like, you're missing out on what gets you wrapped up in the moment in the first place, and why you're feeling angry that, so-and-so cheated to win, or why you're feeling angry that, maybe this guy lost even though he lost fair and square, or whatever the case is. By peeling back that curtain and looking at, like, guys like Dave Meltzer and Wade Keller. I know these are names that mean nothing to you, but like, these are guys that report on the industry and talk about backstage news and stuff that really would never make it out to the public. It kind of ruins the mystique.
It does. It really does. And I think with the gaming industry, if what I've seen so far, it doesn't touch into that stuff, which I think is pretty cool. It doesn't really delve in so far that you are being spoiled. And I think that's where it's a little bit more unique. But I forget where I was going with that. But
so my cat Dax just jumped up on the microphone stand.
That's precious.
I think he wants me to feed him. So I guess that means it's time for us to stop.
Probably.
Dax, say hi to the audience. And he's like, he just walked over near my candle and he's like, nope, it's fire. I don't like that. So I'm gonna wrap up the show before my cat burns himself alive. Thank you everybody for tuning in. If you missed out on the mailbag and you'd like to let us know what documentaries you'd like to see, hit us up on our Discord room. The link will be in the show notes for that. Of course, you can always hit us up on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram at WDGR Podcast. That's at WDGR Podcast. Will, I know you're on Twitter. How can they find you?
Will_gear.
And you can find me at ScienceStorm. And thank you, everybody, for listening in and all of your support. We'll see you next time.
Thank you. See ya.